Hi, my name is Josette Riep from the University of Cincinnati. I am currently pursuing a master's degree in IT, and I'm very happy to be here today. The topic that I'm covering is called BASSAI. BASSAI is really focused on its increasing STEM graduation rates among African Americans, and it stands for Bias Aware Services Supported Through Artificial Intelligence. There's also a historical context, however. BASSAI is rooted in the martial arts, and it's a kata, or a series of techniques focused on breaking barriers. And when we think about the use of AI in terms of increasing STEM graduation rates for African Americans, we're really looking for that sequence of techniques, that combination of factors that may change from person to person, but do allow us to break through those barriers. So the abstract is pretty simple. Higher educational institutions, quite frankly, do not produce enough STEM graduation rates to keep pace with the growing demand in the STEM related field. And in particular, when we're looking at African Americans, the graduation rates are pretty low. So what we want to do in this study is to really look at how we can leverage AI ML to better understand barriers to success, personalize the student experience, and provide pathways of attainment. So the research question: what factors contribute towards better graduation outcomes for African American students? And how can we leverage artificial intelligence in order to identify success patterns that ultimately help African Americans overcome those barriers to graduation? So a bit of background, just to kind of set the stage. When you look at the IT field and you look at projections from 2019 to 2029, there's a 3.7% growth overall for all occupations. When you look at IT in particular, that growth is about 11%. And when you look at information research scientists, which is a subsection of IT, that growth rate is even higher at 15%. So we know that STEM is much needed. Companies, organizations really are looking for qualified individuals. What we also know, however, is that when you look at the growth rate for STEM graduates, it's going in the opposite direction. Regardless of your demographic, you can see that in most cases, the graduation rates are going down. And so the growth year to year of STEM graduates for Caucasians, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians may be the exception, even though that's still not great. You'll notice that the growth year to year is trending in the wrong direction. African Americans in particular, though, is much more dire. And you can see the numbers that I've highlighted for a couple of those years where not only did it not just, it grew by less, it just didn't even grow. It actually decreased. And so it is really something that needs to be addressed. What does the literature tell us? Because this is not a new phenomenon. Has been a challenge that many have tried to address over the years. And there's a lot of information out there about why, what are the fail factors. And you'll read things about perceived lack of interest in STEM, less than successful recruitment strategies, lack of finances, unidentified or unaddressed skills gap. Math in particular comes up a lot when you're talking about that. Inability to fully engage in the higher education experience. Lack of connections or mentors, engagement, not really feeling a part of the institution. Experiences with faculty and administration. Experiences can either be very helpful or in some cases very detrimental, depending on the particular case. Lack of family or network with collegial experience. So Gen 1, for example, talking about whether or not a student is a first generation student and the impact that may have when they don't have someone in their family who can help them navigate the college experience. What we also see in the literature is that, although we have a challenge in getting students in the door, once students are in the door, we have another challenge of keeping them in STEM. And so there's something that some researchers call the invisible wall. And that's, usually occurs in the 3rd to 5th year of study, not the 1st or 2nd. And in that 3rd or 5th year, you see a huge drop off of students who transition out of STEM programs, or they drop out of post-secondary education altogether. And if you look at the table here, you'll see that in terms of engineering and computer science, the total that persisted is, in between 28 and 30%. The total who actually left without a degree at all is alarmingly high and ranges between 35 and 45%, which is really a dramatic number that really needs to be addressed. And then there's also those who decide that, STEM is not for them and they switch degrees. So what can we do about it? There are many items that have been identified through literature that as potential success opportunities. This includes mentoring, public-private partnerships, internships, and co-ops. And we know that there are many studies out there that show that mentoring certainly makes a difference, and public-private partnerships make a difference, and internships and co-ops absolutely make a difference. The challenge is the numbers aren't changing. And is that because these programs need more time? Or is it because, it's not, we can't scale it enough in order for it to make a difference? There's a lot of human capital required to support mentoring and some of these other items. And so one of the other things that we want to look at is how can we truly leverage AI, and can that help augment, those very important experiences that students have through mentorships and others. Intelligent tutoring systems is something that is highlighted in a lot of studies, adaptive group formations for collaboration. So leveraging AI in order to identify where students may, have opportunities for growth or partnerships, with other students or with faculty or other mentors. Intelligent virtual reality is another. So really leveraging VR in order to augment the student experience. One really interesting example that leverage AI in order to augment human resources that are used to transition students from high school to college is something called Pounce that was generated at GSU. And the intent was to ensure that students didn't fall victim to what's called the summer melt, so that before they have an opportunity to transfer from high school to college, they kind of drop off the radar. Pounce showed success in retaining students before they dropped off. So they were able to increase the number of students who did not fall victim to the summer melt by as much as 10%, which is pretty significant. And so we see glimpses of how AI can be used. So potential advantages: virtual mentoring to support stronger connections, similar to what was done with Pounce. Bias detection and learning within the educational environment, automated matching, enhanced skill development, and adaptive learning platforms for more timely responses. So not looking at, study data 3, 4, 5 years later, but really being able to aggregate that information in real time and to create those opportunities for intervention early in the process. And matching algorithms for experimentation that help to provide exposure to a broad range of technologies and experiences. So the methodology for this research is doing a comparative quantitative study using data from NCES as our base, but we're also augmenting that with survey information. The data sources that we're using from NCES are listed here. And for the B&B longitudinal study in particular, you'll see that, the data ranges from 2011-12 to 2016-17, over 33,000 respondents, with more than 22,000 of those respondents completing it fully, meaning that they were surveyed 3 times over 6 academic years, and they completed that survey 3 times. For some students, depending on the degree, depending on where they were in their trajectory, that information also covers their first period within their position post-graduation. So there's a lot of really good information there that spans 40 categories, in addition to the survey data, transcripts, and institutional data from over 1,900 institutions is also included. The process that we're using is preparing the data using a synthetic data algorithm, and I'll explain that in a bit. Doing the exploratory data analysis, visualizations, classifying and clustering. So if we can look at this wealth of information, can we come out with not fail factors? Let's focus on what the success factors are and see if we can determine ways that we can create a model that can be dynamic enough to be useful. So synthetic data basically gives us a way of creating data based on real information. So in the case of NCES, they have a query tool called PowerStats that allows you to slice and dice the data in different ways. It presents you with the information in aggregate, but it doesn't give it to you at the individual level unless you work with your institution to pull that information in. There are a whole host of issues regarding privacy that need to be considered. And so in order to address the privacy issue and also make sure that we have the ability to explode it out at the individual level, we're using a process called synthetic data in order to create the data that we need based on the statistical information available through NCES. And you'll notice on the chart on the left, it gives you a comparative study between if you use private data, that's obviously the best, but that's identifiable information. If you use classic anonymization, so you've anonymized the information in some way, interestingly enough, the trend goes pretty far down. Synthetic data gets you fairly close. And so for the purpose of this initial study, we thought that this approach would work well. There are examples of uses of synthetic data in financial institutions. Those that are studying autonomous vehicles, for example, use it. SYNC from Cornell is a framework that was developed for using synthetic data when they were studying census data, for example. And MIT has created a synthetic data vault. So it's a growing field that's expanding its use in many ways. The classification process, again, just requires us to take that summary data, synthesize it. Once we have the synthesized data, go through an inspection process to make sure that the synthesized data actually matches the information that we were presented with in an aggregate form in many ways. Once we've gone through that validation process, then we'll go through a traditional data classification process, using training the models, testing, and trying to predict outcomes. So for initial results, I showed some of the stats from some of the data we've looked at throughout this presentation. I just wanted to share with you a sense of all of the categories of information that are available, and within each of these categories is a whole host of data elements underneath it. One of the things that I'm most interested in is really looking at those that may point to things that are more along the lines of intangibles, so their educational experiences, educational expectations, the teaching experiences, so experiences that students have had with the instructors, the institution type. One of the reasons I'm interested in that is because research has shown that HBCUs tend to graduate more STEM graduates than other institutions. And, so one of the questions is why? Why is that? Do they have a more holistic approach that can be beneficial to other institutions as we move forward? And on that note, I do think it's important to point out that the impact of society and the generational fight for justice cannot be discarded. It's very difficult in many ways for students to focus on study skills when you have these images, and not just the images, but the reality, that their loved ones or they may be at risk in many ways. And so I do think that really thinking about how these challenges really impact African Americans is an important piece of this puzzle as well. So next steps. We're going to complete the data synthesis process. That's what we're in the process of doing now. Execute pattern recognition across data grouping. So we want to do it across all students, regardless of their race. But then we are going to focus on doing it strictly for African Americans, because when you do it in total, there may be things that we miss when we're not focused on African Americans. We want to identify patterns and document the classifications. We also, as I mentioned, will be conducting a survey and focus groups to identify the other intangibles. And so I think the societal impact is one of those for sure. And then finally, we want to document the model and publish the research to promote the use of BASSAI, or a model that can be used in educational systems and services to really present that customized, personalized intervention and support services that can hopefully increase the number of students that are able to graduate with a STEM degree. So thank you very much. I look forward to speaking with you soon and getting into a dialogue, answering questions, and really working together to see how we can push this research forward. Thank you.